Introduction to Surah 11, Hud. For the chronological place of this surah and the general argument of Suwar 10 through 15, see the previous introduction. In subject matter, this surah supplements the preceding one. In the last surah, stress was laid on that side of Allah's dealings with man, which lead to mercy. Here stress is laid on the side which deals with justice and the punishment of sin when all grace is resisted. In summary, verses 1 through 24, Allah's revelation of mankind, his dealing with man, and his long-suffering patience are contrasted with man's ingratitude, his love of falsehood and vanity, and his crookedness. 25 through 49, Noah's selfishness and humility in teaching his people the truth of Allah were traduced by the ungodly and his message ridiculed and rejected, but he built his ark under directions from Allah and was saved with peace and blessings while his rejectors perished. 50 through 68, the Prophet Hud preached to his people odd against falsely considered to be divinity, against those falsely considered to be gods, and the Prophet Saleh and his people, to his people, the mood against dishonoring the symbol of Allah's bounty. In both cases, Allah's signs were rejected and the rejectors were blotted out. 69 through 95, Lot's people were given to abominations. Abraham pleaded for them, and Lot was sent out to them, but they went deeper and deeper into sin and suffered the penalty. Shuaib's people, the Midianites, were warned against fraud and mischief, but they reproached him with helpfulness and were themselves destroyed. 96 to 123. Its arrogant leaders, like Pharaoh, who misled men, and men bring ruin on themselves, but Allah is just, and the penalty for sin is real and abiding. Therefore shun all wrongdoing and serve Allah wholeheartedly. And two verses I really draw attention to is verse 1. Alif Lam Ra Kitabun Uhkimat Ayatuhu Thumma Fussilat min ladun Hakimin Kabir. And so the separated letters continue with that verse, and a verse of love by and for God, linking to, of course, forgiveness and mercy. وَاسْتَغْفِرُوا رَبَّكُمْ ثُمَّ تُوبُوا إِلَيْهِ إِنَّ رَبِّي رَحِيمٌ وَدُودٌ. And so verse 90 there. And the introduction to Surah 12. It's interesting, it kind of mirrors itself and some stuff. Yusuf. For the chronological place of this surah and the general argument of the surahs 10 through 15, see the introduction 2 ago. The subject matter of the surah is entirely taken up with the story recapitulated rather than told of Joseph, the youngest, but one of the 12 sons of the patriarch Jacob. The story is called the most beautiful of stories. 12:3. For many reasons. It is most detailed of any of the Quran, in one place anyways. It is full of human vicissitudes and therefore deservedly appealed to men and women of all classes. It paints in vivid colors with the spiritual implications, the most varied aspects of life, the patriarch's old age, and the confidence between him and his little best beloved son, the elder brother's jealousy of this little son, their plots, and the father's grief, the sale of the father's darling into slavery for a miserable little price, carnal love contrasted with purity and chastity, false charges, prison, the interpretation of dreams, low life and high life, innocence raised to honor, the sweet revenge of forgiveness and benevolence, high matters of state and administration, humility and exaltation, filial love, and the beauty of piety and truth. So very strong in Confucian values. The story is similar to, but not identical with, the biblical story of Genesis 37 to 50. But the atmosphere is totally different. The biblical story is like a folk tale in which morality has no place. Its tendency is to exalt the clever, financially minded Jew against the Egyptian, and to explain certain ethnic and tribal peculiarities in later Jewish history. Joseph is shown as buying up all the cattle and the land of the poor Egyptians for the state under the stress of famine conditions, and making the Israelites rulers over Pharaoh's cattle. The Quranic story, on the other hand, is less a narrative than a highly spiritual sermon or allegory explaining the seeming contradictions in life, the enduring nature of virtue in a world of flux and change, the marvelous working of Allah's eternal purpose in his plan as unfolded to us on the wide canvas of history. This aspect of the matter has been a favorite with Muslimin poets and Sufi exegetes. Sufis explaining the thing. In summary, verse 1 through 20, life is a dream and a vision to be explained by stories and parables, as in the perspicuous Quranic text. The truth which Joseph, the prophet of Allah, saw in his vision was unpalatable to his 10 half-brothers, who plotted against him and sold him into slavery to a merchant for a few pieces of silver. 21 through 42, Joseph was taken by the merchant into Egypt and was brought by a great Egyptian court dignitary, Aziz, who adopted him. The dignitary's wife sought, but in vain, to attract Joseph to the delicates of earthly love. His resistance brought him disgrace and imprisonment, but he taught the truth even in prison, and was known for his kindness. One of his fellow prisoners, to whom he had interpreted a dream, was released and received into the favor as the king's cupbearer. 43 to 68, the king had a vision, which Joseph, though through the cupbearer, got an opportunity to explain. Joseph insisted that all the scandal that had been raised about him should be publicly cleared. He was received into favor and was appointed wazir by the king. His half-brothers, driven by famine, came to Egypt and were treated kindly by Joseph without their knowing his identity. He asked them to bring his full brother, the youngest son, Benjamin, 69 through 93. Joseph detains Benjamin, and by a stratagem convicts his half-brothers of their hatred and crime against himself, forgives them, and sends them to bring Jacob and the whole family from Canaan to Egypt. 94 to 111. Israel, Jacob, comes, is comforted, and settles in Egypt. The name of Allah is glorified, the truth of Allah endures forever, and Allah's purpose is fully revealed in the hereafter. And we see this chapter also mirrors Muhammad's life, or kind of relates to, sets a model for some of what he did after this chapter. Some of this chapter was recited in the conquest of Mecca, those events. Introduction to Surah 13, Al-Ra'ad. The chronological place of this surah and the general arguments of Surah 10 through 15 was described 3 introductions ago. The special argument of this surah deals with the aspect of Allah's revelation of himself to man and his dealings with him, which is concerned with certain contrasts which are here pointed out. There is the revelation of the prophets, which comes in spoken words adapted to the language of the various men and groups of men to whom it comes, and there is the parallel revelation or signs in the constant laws of external nature on this earth and in the visible heavens. There is the contrast between recurring life and death already in the external world. Why should men disbelieve in the life after death? They mock at the idea of punishment because it is deferred, but can they not see Allah's power and glory in thunder and the forms of nature? All creation praises him. It is the good that endures, the evil that is swept away like froth or scum, not only in miracles, but in the normal working of the world, are shown Allah's power and mercy. What is the punishment in this world compared to that in the life to come? Even here there are signs of the working of his law. Plot or plan as men will, it is Allah's will that must prevail. This is illustrated in Joseph's story in the preceding surah. Summary 1 through 18. The book of Revelation is true and is confirmed by the signs to be seen in visible nature. Allah, who created such mighty forces in outer nature, can raise up man again after death. Allah's knowledge is all-encompassing, so are his power and goodness. 19 through 31. The righteous seek the pleasure of Allah and find peace. The evil ones break his law, cavil and dispute, and reject faith. The wrath of Allah will take them unawares, but in his own good time. 19 through 31. 32 through 43. So was it with the prophets before. They were mocked, but the mockers were destroyed, while the righteous rejoiced and were established. 13 through 43. And so, chapter 14, introduction to Surah 14, Ibrahim. For the chronology and the general argument of this surah in the series of Suwar 10 through 15, see 4 ago. The special subject of this surah is a continuation of the concluding portions of the last surah, which explained how Allah's revelation gains ground in spite of selfish men's opposition. Here illustrations are given from the story of Moses and Abraham's prayer for Mecca forms the core of the surah. Summary 1 through 27. Revelation leads man from darkness to light. It comes to each nation in its own language and for its own special circumstances. So was it with Moses and other prophets. There was a conflict of evil with good, but evil was destroyed. Parable of the goodly tree. 28 through 52. Why will men not receive Allah's grace? Why will they choose to go astray? Abraham prayed to be saved from infidelity himself and his posterity, and he prayed for Mecca, the city of the new revelation through Arabia. Good and evil will find their proper retribution, and Allah's plan of unity will prevail. And isn't there portions of this that can be used in the funeral prayer? Surah 15, Al-Hijra. This is the last of the 6 surahs of the Alif Lam Ra series, 10 to 15. I should have said Suwar, because that's the plural. Its place of chronology is in the late Meccan period, probably somewhere near the middle of that period. And, 5 introductions ago, the general subject matter of this series is mentioned. The special subject matter of this surah is the protection of Allah's revelation and Allah's truth. Evil arose from pride and the warping of man's will, but Allah's mercy is the antidote, as was proved in the case of Abraham and Lot, and might have been proved by the people of the Akka and the Hijr, so the woods and the rock, if they had only attended to Allah's signs. The Quran, beginning with the 7 oft-repeated verses, is the precious vehicle for the praises of Allah. Summary 1 through 25. Allah will guard his revelation in spite of the cavils of unbelievers. Allah is the source of all things. He knows his own people, whom he will gather to himself. 26 through 50. How evil arose through the pride of Iblis, to whom a respite was granted for a period, but neither fear nor evil affect those who receive Allah's message. 51 through 84. The mercy of the law to Abraham was conveyed by the same messengers that were sent to destroy the people of Lot for their unspeakable crimes. Evil brought its retribution also on the companions of the wood and of the rocky tract. Okay, it does translate the terms al-Aka and al-Hijr. 85 through 99. The Quran and its Suwar teach you to celebrate Allah's praises, learn humility and worship, and serve Allah all your life. And that's inherent in the term Mazdayasneh. Mazdayasnian, all praise, all song, all worship, all rites. I said all celebrations, right? Are for God. That's what that term means. So religion is said to have been called that at some point. Introduction to Surah 16. Al-Nahl. Chronologically, the surah, like the 6 which preceded it, belongs to the late Meccan period, except perhaps verse 110 and some of the verses that follow, but the chronology has no significance. In subject matter, it sums up, from a new point of view, the arguments on the great questions of Allah's dealings with man, his self-revelation to man, and how the messengers and the message are writ large in every phrase of Allah's creation and of the life of man. The new point of view is that nature points to nature's God. Summary of 1 through 25. Everything in creation proclaims the glory of Allah. To man is given dominion over nature, that man may recognize Allah's unity and Allah's truth. 16, 1 through 25, I said that. 26 through 50. Man should never lose sight of his goal, which is the good, or dispute with the great teachers who are sent to all peoples to bring about unity. All creatures serve Allah. 51 through 83. Allah's favors and man's ingratitude were counted. His signs in the rain-bearing clouds, the cattle that give milk, the bee that produces honey, the wonderful relations of family and social life, and the refinements and comforts of civilization. Now, I like to include that part in my travel prayers, really, because I like to go out into nature. Is part of it, but 66 or 69, right? (84 to 100). The messengers of truth will bear witness against those who reject the truth. Allah will judge us according to our faith and deeds. 101 to 128. The Quran is true. It guides and gives glad tidings. Believe and make the most of life in all things good and lawful. Follow the example of Abraham. Be true in faith and righteousness and do good. 83. Well, 82 is the one that relates to the is one of the chief healing. Oh, I'm thinking a different chapter. That's the next chapter. But 66 through 69, yeah, that's the B verse. And the cow verse. So, introduction to Surah 17. Al-Isra, or Bani Israel. In the gradation of spiritual teaching, we saw the first 7 Suwar sketched the early spiritual history of man and led up to the formation of the new Ummah of Islam. Suwar 8 through 16 formed another series dealing with the formation of the new Ummah and its consolidation, and Allah's dealing with man, taken as an Ummah and considered in its social relations in organized communities. We now come to a fresh series, Suwar 17 through 29, which may be considered in 3 parts. Suwar 17 through 21 begin with an allusion to the Miraj, of which more later, and proceed to spiritual history as touching individuals rather than nations. The old prophets and stories of the past are referred to from this point of view. Suwar 22 through 25 refer to Hajj, the pilgrimage, worship and prayer, chastity, privacy, etc., as related to man's individual spiritual growth. Suwar 26 through 29 go back to the old prophets and stories of the past as illustrating the growth of the individual soul and its reactions against the lives of the communities and the reactions of the communities to the lives of its great individual souls. Now let us consider Surah 17 by itself. It opens with the mystic vision of the ascension of the Holy Prophet. He was transported from the sacred mosque of Mecca to the farthest mosque of Jerusalem in a night and shown some of the signs of Allah. The majority of commentators take this night vision literally, but allow that there were other occasions on which a spiritual journey or vision occurred. Well, they can both occur together, right? Even on the supposition of a miraculous bodily journey, it conceded that the body was almost transformed into spiritual fineness. The Hadith literature gives details of this journey, and its study helps to elucidate its meaning. You know, there's more narrations about that than everything prior. The Holy Prophet was first transported to the seat of the earlier revelations in Jerusalem, and then taken through the seven heavens, even to the sublime throne, and initiated into the spiritual mysteries of the human soul struggling in space and time. The Spaniard Miguel Asen, Arabic professor in the University of Madrid, has shown that this Mi'raj literature had a great influence on the medieval literature of Europe, and especially on the great Italian poem, the Divine Comedy or drama of Dante, which towers like a landmark in medieval European literature. Yeah, it's not pronounced medieval. The reference to this great mystic story of the Mirage is a fitting prelude to the journey of the human soul in its spiritual growth in life. The first steps in such growth must be through moral conduct. The reciprocal rights of parents and children, kindness to our fellow men, courage and firmness in the hour of danger, and sense of personal responsibility and a sense of Allah's presence through prayer and praise. The Miraj is usually dated to the 27th night of the month of Rajab. I'm recording this during the month of Rajab, by the way. And I had an interesting vision on the 27th of Rajab once, when it was the same night as the cross quarter. Though other dates, for example, the 17th of Rabi al-Awwal, are also given, you know, with less authority. In the year before the Hijra, this fixes the date of the opening verse of the surah. The portions of the surah may have been a little earlier. Summary 1 through 22. The spiritual experiences of the prophets of God are given in order that God's signs may be made clearer to men. Humanity is misled into evil and must be guided to a sense of personal responsibility. And remember, again, if I may not catch all the gender neutrals to kind of make clear, this is not just talking to males here, obviously. 23 through 40. Our service to God is shown also in our human relations, goodness to parents and kinsmen and strangers in want, as well as kindness to children, purity in sexual relations, justice and respect for human life, protection of orphans, probity in all dealings, and avoidance of arrogance. 41 through 60. God's glory is above all comparison, and reception of his revelation marks off the man of faith from those who do not believe. But believers should speak fair and avoid dissensions, for God doth encompass all of humanity. 61 through 84, pride caused the fall of Iblis, Diabolos. But the children of Adam have been raised in excellence above other creation. They will be judged by their deeds. Prayer is good at stated times and at night, and the Quran is offered as healing and mercy. 85 through 111, inspiration. The Quran, well, is revelation, if you're going to divide. But inspiration would be the prophetically inspired teachings, is a sign of God's grace, and men should accept it without carping excuses. Be humble in prayer and praise. And this chapter, just like Surah 7, teaches a middle path in worship, not too loud, not too quiet, and other such things. And it indicates that you can say the Quran in bowing and prostrating, which is contrary to certain traditions that people have apparently come up with, I think. But introduction to Surah 18, Al-Kahf, has been explained in the introduction to Surah 17, how the 5 Suwar, 17 to 21, develop the theme of the individual soul's spiritual history and how they fit into the general scheme of exposition. This particular Meccan surah may be called a lesson in the brevity and mastery of life. First, there is a story of the companions of the cave who slept therein for a long period and yet thought that they had been there only a day or less. And there is the story of the mysterious teacher who shows Moses how life itself is a parable. And further, there is the story of Dhul al-Qarnayn, the two-horned one, the powerful ruler of West and East, who made an iron wall to protect the weak against the strong. The parables refer to the brevity, uncertainty, and vanity of this life, to the many paradoxes in it, which can only be understood by patience and the fullness of knowledge, and to the need of guarding our spiritual gains against the incursions of evil. And the contracting and expanding of the sense of time and spiritual experiences is a well-established feature. And I've experienced that aspect of it myself, but that's my own visions and dreams. That's for a different playlist, right? 1 through 22, summary. The Quran is a direction and a warning. This life is brief and subject to vicissitudes. Our ideas of time are defective, as shown in the story of the companions of the cave who had faith, truth, patience, and other virtues, but their life was a mystery that can be fathomed but by few. 23 through 44. Knowledge is for Allah. Be on your guard against idle conjectures and cocksure hopes. Learn from the Quran the parable of the man who is puffed up with this world's goods and is brought to naught. 45 through 59. This life is uncertain and variable. Goodness and virtue are better and more durable. 4. The day of reckoning will come with its mercy and its wrath. 60 through 82. Moses, in his thirst for knowledge, forgot his limitations. Patience and faith were enjoined on him, and he understood when the paradoxes of life were explained. 83 through 110. Dhul al-Qarnayn had a wide dominion. He punished the guilty and rewarded the good. He protected the weak from the lawless, but he had faith and valued the guidance of Allah. Allah is one, and his service is righteousness. And remember that chapter. This is sort of a means of end times protection. And if you can't do that, the first are last 10 verses. If you can't do that, the first are 10 verses. So let me go forward here. Introduction to Surah 19, Margam. The spiritual growth of man as an individual soul having been explained in Surah 17 as beginning with the first principles of moral conduct, and in Surah 18 as being dependent upon our realization of the brevity and mystery of this life. And the true use of power, as in the story of Dhul al-Qarnayn. We now pass to the story of individual messengers of Allah and their personal relations with their environment. Yahya with his father Zachariah, Jesus with his mother Mary, Abraham with his unbelieving father, Moses with his brother Aaron, Ismail with his family, and Idris in the high station to which he was called. Seeing how these great ones fitted in the scheme of life, man is condemned for his want of faith, are for degrading his faith to superstition, and warned of the hereafter. In chronology, it was revealed before the first resort of the batch of Muslimin to Abyssinia, say 7 years before Al-Hijra. In summary, 1 through 15, Zechariah was anxious to have an heir to carry on God's work in a world of unrighteousness, and Yahya was given to him. 16 through 40, Mary, the mother of Jesus, was maligned by her people, but Jesus comforted her and was good to her. 41 through 65, Abraham was persecuted for his faith by his people, including his unbelieving father, but he withdrew from them and was blessed. Moses was helped by his brother Aaron. Ismail brought up his family in piety, and Idris was truthful and pious in a high station, and they showed the way. Yet men will not learn of the good of life. 68 through 98, so there's not commentary listed for 66 and 67, so man should not disbelieve in the hereafter, nor sully his faith by false notions about Allah. Now, I think that maybe I should wing a quick commentary about verses 66 and 67 here. So, you know, you're bringing forth once you were is going to be as easy as that. But yeah, that's the 2 short verses. I understand why they skipped it. But introduction to Surah 20, Taha. The chronology of the surah has some significance. It has some relation to the spiritual lessons which it teaches. And I guess maybe I will say those 2 verses. وَيَقُولُ الْإِنسَانُ أَإِذَا مَا مِتُّ لَسَوْفَ أُخْرَجُ حَيًّا أَوَلَا يَذْكُرُ الْإِنسَانُ أَنَّا خَلَقْنَاهُ مِنْ قَبْلُ وَلَمْ يَكُ شَيْئًا. Oh, I guess I didn't need to say the on, but at the end, because we weren't going any further. But okay, Surah 20, Taha. Abbreviated, separated letters by themselves, so beyond. It was used with great effect in that remarkable scene which resulted in Umar's conversion, and which took place about the 7th year before the Hijra. The scene is described with dramatic details by Ibn Hisham. Umar had previously been one of the greatest enemies and persecutors of Islam. Like his bloodthirsty kinsman, Quraysh, he meditated slaying the Prophet. When it was suggested to him that there were near relatives of his that had embraced Islam, his sister Fatima and her husband Sa'id were Muslimin, but in those days of persecution, they had kept their faith secret. When Umar went to their house, he heard them reciting this surah from a written copy they had. For a while, they concealed the copy. Umar attacked his sister and her husband, but they bore the attack with exemplary patience and declared their faith. Umar was so struck with their sincerity and fortitude that he asked to see the leaf from which they had been reading. It was given to him, after he agreed to wash up fully, His soul was touched, and he not only came into the faith, but became one of its strongest supporters and champions. The leaf contained some portions of the surah, perhaps the introductory, the initial portion. The mystic letters, Gaha, are prefixed to this surah. What do they mean? The earliest tradition is that they denote a dialectical interjection, meaning, "O man." If so, the title is particularly appropriate in 2 ways. It was a direct and personal address to a man in a high state of excitement, tempted by his temper to do grievous wrong, but called by Allah's grace, as by a personal appeal, to face the realities, for Allah knew his inmost secret thoughts. Verse 7. The revelation was sent by Allah, most gracious, out of his grace and mercy. Verse 5. It takes up the story from the last surah of man as a spiritual being and illustrates it in further details. It tells the story of Moses in the crisis of his life when he received Allah's commission and in his personal relations with his mother, and how he came to be brought up in the Pharaoh's house to learn all the wisdom of the Egyptians and for use in Allah's service, and for his personal relations with Pharaoh, whom we take to be his adopted father. Verse 9. It further tells the story of a fallen soul who misled the Israelites into idolatry and recalls how man's arch enemy, Satan, caused his fall. Prayer and praise are necessary to man to cure his spiritual blindness and enable him to appreciate God's revelation. Summary, verse 1 through 8. The revelation of Allah, the Quran, and previous scriptures revealed in their words, is not an occasion of distress, but is a gift of mercy from God. Most gracious. 9 through 16. How Moses was first chosen and led to his mission to Pharaoh with his brother Aaron. 37 through 76. How the mother of Moses was directed to cast the infant Moses into the river to be brought up in Pharaoh's house under God's own supervision in order to preach to Pharaoh and declare God's glory. 77 through 104. How Moses was directed to lead his people and to quell the rebellious spirit, and how that spirit was stirred up by Samari, which means like caravan leader or something like that in ancient Egyptian. Is it Samari? Guess I'll look that up closer to relating this. 105 to 135. On the day of judgment, personal responsibility will be enforced and God's truth acknowledged. Humanity should guard against Adam's enemy, Satan, and should renounce vanities, purify himself with prayer and praise, and await the call to God. And by prayer, we mean just, very specifically referring to formats, but you can supplicate and stuff all the time. But the prayer in a lot of scriptural traditions denotes something more than just pleading and talking to God however you want. It's a system, right? Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.